And I'm really excited today to show you the Amazon TCO. And so if you're not familiar and you can see my screen here, this is the Amazon Total Cost of Ownership Calculator. So this tool is very helpful in cases where you've got to calculate what maybe the cost looks like of a workload specifically that you have running on premise today, and you want to move it out to the cloud. So in this case, we're going to look at the Amazon cloud, but what does that actually cost? What's the total cost of ownership to move that workload out? So if you can see here, I've got 3 lines that I've put in, and you can add more of these, and I'll show you. Actually, we'll do one of these together. And let me actually back up a little bit. So we want to choose this link up here. Actually, I go to this link, and once I get there and I get signed in, I'm going to select my currency, select the environment that we're going to compare against. So in this case, I'm looking at on-premise. I'm looking at US East Virginia, and I'm looking at virtual machines. These can be toggled to whatever your specific needs are, but this is what we're going to look at today. And so for servers, I'm going to go and add my app server line here. I'm going to say I've got 2 of those. Put 4 cores, put 4 gigs of memory, not a database server, so in this case we're going to choose just a non-database. I'm going to run the guest operating system is Linux. Hypervisor of choice is VMware, but you could choose KVM or Hyper-V or whichever you'd like. And so I've added a line here, which is web servers. I'm going to say there's 2 of those. Same thing, 4 cores, 4 gigs of memory. We're going to say it's not a database server. We're going to choose Linux, and we're going to choose VMware for hypervisor. So we'll add one more line, which I think you saw before. So we're going to call this DB or database server. We're going to have just one server instance. But you probably saw, so before I put the value in, it will give you a suggestion of what it'll accept for values. So again, we're just going to choose 1 CPUs, 1 to 196 or 1 to 96. We're going to choose 4, put 4 gigs memory in there. This is a database server type, so we'll go ahead and choose database. The operating system, we're going to choose not Linux, but Windows. Bring your own license. We're going to keep this set to VMware. And the database engine we can choose, which will be either SQL Server or SQL Server Standard or SQL Server Enterprise. I'm going to leave it at Standard. Okay, and down here, storage, we can choose whether it's SAN, NAS, object. One thing to note I want to show you, because we are going to choose SAN, and we'll kick through this calculator. But if I choose object storage, what it's going to ask us is, okay, so how much raw capacity, storage capacity, and how much of that data, the percentage of it is accessed infrequently. And the reason why it's asking you that is, so when Amazon does a calculation for storage, it's going to propose and it's going to show you costs of putting that storage out inside an infrequently accessed storage tier at a reduced cost. So that's why it's asking how much of a percentage of that is accessed infrequently. Okay, so I'm going to set this back to SAN. We're going to say 5 terabytes, but this could be in gigs actually if you wanted to. And we're going to choose disk type of SSD, but it could just be HDD. And that's it. So I'm not going to add any more rows to that. We'll go ahead and click calculate. Wait for the magic to happen. And once the calculation's complete, you'll see a dashboard that'll look something like this. And we'll go through this, and I'll come and touch on these 2 options once we're done. But so in this case, good news, it's telling me that if I take my on-premise workload and I run it in the AWS cloud, I'm going to save, or I could save, 78% a year. So that's a pretty good number. And then it gives us our 3-year total savings would be $207,501. So again, good number. I really liked how it went through and it gave us a 3-year cost breakdown. So it's showing you server, storage, network, and labor and it's showing us on premise what that looks like, stacked cost, and then what it looks like inside AWS, and then another breakdown over 3 years on premise, AWS, and then each category. I think one thing to note that might surprise some people, but you'll notice that the IT labor number is, I believe, the only one. It is the only one that didn't go down. It actually went up quite a bit. And remember, when you put things out inside the public cloud, this is infrastructure as a service, right? So we're not necessarily taking everything that you've got going on premise and moving it out to the cloud strictly for a cost save. And I would say actually in all these areas. Now, most of them we're going to see that that's going to be the case. But for the IT labor, don't always expect that, because all these other areas of service, so we've got server or infrastructure, we've got server, storage, network, those, when we move them out to the cloud, absolutely will show a savings over 3 years. And there is a little bit more sometimes to just these areas. Like we got to think about story or traffic and data moving in and out of the cloud. Most of the time when the data goes into the cloud, there's no charge, but when I move data around and out of the cloud, there's a charge. And depending on how things are architected, if I've got storage that's inside the same region and availability zones, there is sometimes either none or a reduced charge for that traffic. But if I've got traffic that's leaving and going to multiple different regions and availability zones within those regions, well, then we might see more costs. So it just depends. Okay, so going through a little bit deeper, environment details, showing more specific details about the on-premise environment and what made up the environment and servers, and then showing what's inside the Amazon environment and what those environment details and specifics look like. And we go down to the bottom here, the cost breakdown. Really good job here of showing, here's the hardware, the software, the overhead. Overhead meaning, and I'll show you in a different area, things like power and cooling and different overhead that's involved there. So we'll keep going through, and this was really pretty awesome too. So from a calculation standpoint, if anyone's wondering, like, well, I wonder where they got those numbers from, or what actually makes up these numbers, like where were all the values derived from? Okay, and so when you go through, this shows you calculations both for on-premise server cost, hardware costs, where did the AWS costs come from. One thing to note is in this case, and I won't cover that too deeply here, but Amazon has what's called a savings plan or a reserved instance, and there's different reasons why you may or may not want to use those. But in this case, they're showing you that 3-year cost on a 3-year partial upfront. So with specific to EC2, I could look at a savings plan, and they have those based on compute, and they have those based on a server, and each one of those is a little bit more specific than the other. But in this case, we've got to put up a little bit of upfront money to get the reduced hourly rate. No big deal, just we're showing a reduction there, which is important. So we go through, and there's a ton of information. I'm not going to cover every single one of these lines or these areas, but a lot of great information that'll help you to answer the where did this number come from. Okay, so I do want to go back and show you at the very top, if you need to add additional servers, if you need to choose the Windows versus Linux, if you need to change something in your original inputs, you can just click on Change Input, and it'll take you back to the screen where you were able to put in your servers, right, where we built in the application web database server, and we said kind of a little bit about each one of those. You can change this or add to it, or remove it, I guess, rather, here. You can also see maybe you want to look at a different region. And so that's a possibility. Maybe you want to look at the currency in a different way. Maybe you want to not consider the storage or consider different types of storage. You can absolutely go and do that as well. So I'm not going to make any changes here, but I'm going to click on Calculate TCO so we can go back to one other screen I want to show you. Okay, perfect, which is the Modify Assumptions. So if you want to choose or change the storage type, maybe the cost per gig's lower, maybe there's a discounted price. Maybe you want to choose something around the server hardware and the virtual host, and there's something that we need to change in here. There's a lot of different values and parameters that can be tweaked here. So just remember that there's a whole bunch of different things that can be tweaked and modified. And so if we want to change those, go ahead and save it. It'll recalculate your TCO. In this case, I'm going to click cancel because I'm not going to make any changes. And at this point, I'm back to the screen here, which is my TCO calculator. I do have the opportunity now to download the report. And so if you want to download the report and take all the information that is available here,